the Fan3Cast, dishing out the hottest NASCAR news and views while celebrating the three's historic comeback. Here are your hosts, Michael Metzger and Jason Schultz.
Jason is back after doing double duty, going to Dover and now Pocono Raceway. I'm envious of him. So actually, Jason, let's start there. How was your Pocono experience?
Pocono is definitely a really unique track. With it being so big and having three turns, you can't really see the whole track at first, but it's definitely interesting being at the race and getting to go around the pit paddock area. And there was a tunnel that would lead you from the grandstand side to the infield, and it actually looked like a subway tunnel from New York City, so that was a little interesting. It was first time at Pocono, so it was really big experience to see everything and see how this track looks and plays out, because it's definitely, I would say, definitely a lot different than you see it on TV. It's just a little more, I would say, more like a racetrack when you see it in person than on TV, when it's just, they don't really show you much of anything besides racing on the track.
Now, how was the fan experience? I believe they still have there, when I went many, many years ago, kind of a pit area where you had bars, but you could still have access to drivers, pass a book through. My claim to fame is I was able to get Ricky Rudd's autograph by passing a book through there to him. So what did you see? Do they still have that? What was your takeaway on that?
Yeah, they definitely still have that little fan feature. Definitely a great chance for autographs, which is really cool. And their garage area is really visible from the paddock area, and that's something that Watkins Glen definitely doesn't have. They have about like one fence, a little opening, but at Pocono they have really long fence. You can see the whole garage area, which is really nice, and it's just a lot more access than I think most tracks offer these days.
Now I'm going to put you on the spot with the most recent tracks you've been to, and correct me if I'm wrong. The four of them I'm thinking off the top of my head are Pocono, Dover, New Hampshire, and Watkins Glen. How would you rate the four as far as a fan's experience at the track?
That is really interesting. Oh, that's a tough one. I'll throw Darlington onto that list.
Oh, right, Darlington. So you got five to choose from.
Yeah. I don't think I'll be able to put them on order, but I would say the best experience probably came... Well, I'm just going to tell you which ones didn't come on the list. I went for Pocono on top. There's great access, but probably wasn't the greatest. Watkins Glen, it's really... I don't know, it's just not my favorite thing, and they don't really offer a bunch of neat views like some of the other tracks do. Dover, you can't really get in the infield, which is why you get to see all the action from outside the track, which is pretty nice. And Darlington was a little interesting. They definitely have a lot of stayers there, which is probably takes away from the experience a little. But I can't really pinpoint one right now. I went to Bristol a few years ago, and I absolutely loved that one. So I think I'll just throw Bristol on the list and put that one at top.
Yeah, I was thinking Bristol as soon as you started talking. You've hit like almost every track there is, it seems, just even the last couple of years.
Yeah, mostly the East Coast. That's my thing, and I just love going to the track so much. It's definitely always a neat experience, and watching races in person is always more fun and exciting than sitting in front of the TV. So I try to hit races every year, 3 a year, and hopefully I'll get to add some more to that list. And I'm already planning in my head which ones I want to go to in the coming years.
Now, taking the fan experience and actually being there in person in perspective, Pocono has gone from 500 to 400 miles just in the last couple of years. How was the race for you? Did it feel too long? Did it just motor right on through?
I would say it's probably a little too long still. It just seems like it's dragged out for a long time. Like the beginning of the race, once they first 10 laps, and everyone gets single file, and it just drags on and on until they have the first caution, which was a pretty good amount of laps into the race. So that was a little tough to watch when it becomes that spread out. But the middle part of the race also got a little spread out. So I would say maybe 350 miles might work for the track, but I still think 400 should stay a little on the long side.
I agree with you on that one. Watching on television, I felt like the first 20 or so laps, which is a little different from you, but the first 20 or so laps seemed to go really fast, and I kind of said to myself, wow, this thing's flying by, we'll be done in no time. And then about lap 80 or something hit, and it just dragged from that point on, it seemed. Kind of hit a wall.
Yeah, and when there's not that many yellow flags flying, that definitely adds to it where it's a little hard to watch. And you would like to say that they could fix that problem with throwing out cautions whenever, but that's definitely not one to provide probably the real race. It would just provide really a gimmicky one, and that's probably not something many people would like to see.
And that's true, especially being such a long track that throwing cautions would actually make it even longer of a situation. But so talking about the race, Jason, we got here our first bullet point about Stewart-Haas Racing. At one point, you had Tony Stewart first, you had Kevin Harvick second, you had Kurt Busch third, you had Danica Patrick staying inside the top 20, which is good for her. When it all shook out, only Kurt Busch stayed. He actually finished third like he was running at that point that I'm referencing. What are we going to make of what happened to Tony Stewart? It was a speeding penalty. To Kevin Harvick, it was another mechanical wheel failure going on. Danica, she hits the wall. Is this team kind of a flash in the pan where they have these moments but they can't sustain what they're doing out there?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. They just can't keep. It seems like they can't keep up once they probably have a good, first 3/4 of a race. Then the last quarter comes and they basically fall apart and they can't keep up and problems strike. So I think it's just probably a team thing we'll need to work on, getting through the whole race instead of just doing those 3/4 of the race and then having a problem. Once they can probably figure out and get in a better groove of how they run the whole race and can stay in contention. And we saw Harvick, he's done that this season, but it's just so sporadic for him. It just seems like as a team overall, they just need to work on putting everything together to be able to contend for victories, because if they got the best equipment out there, if they're strong and they have the strongest cars and fastest cars each weekend, they're going to win every race. It's just they keep getting plagued by these little problems that are probably going to add up if they can't try to solve them in the near future.
Which, that's all fine and good for Kevin Harvick and Kurt Busch, who have wins to fall back on to get into the chase, but Tony Stewart and Danica definitely need to get their act together and be a little bit more consistent. So Jason, despite what we've been talking about, how boring of a race that Pocono was, it did have a bit of an exciting finish between Brad Keselowski and Dale Earnhardt Jr. You had Keselowski leading with trash on his grill, tries to get it off by following behind Danica Patrick, breaks his momentum, Earnhardt gets by, the grill stays covered with debris, and Earnhardt goes on for the win. Did you see it happen from where you were sitting?
Actually, I was walking towards the start-finish line at that point to watch the final few laps from there, so I didn't actually see the move. I think I sort of heard it over on the broadcast, but I didn't really know what was going on. I thought Earnhardt Jr. may have caught him. Definitely, overall, I think it was a bad move by Brad, because he knew he had to get the debris off, but he couldn't really do it in a way that would work correctly. It was probably a strategic and smart move on his point not to blow the engine up, which would have put him back in 35th maybe to finish the race, versus slowing down a little, saving the engine, and running second or third. And I think it was probably one of the smartest moves we've seen him make. He wants to go after the win, and he was really upset that he couldn't because of the debris that flew up. But I think it was a racing move and one he knew he had to make just to stay consistent and not really ruin a day that was going really well for him.
Here's my question with that is, as far as I remember, and I could be wrong, it's happened once or twice before in my lifetime, I don't believe the debris got off of Keselowski's car, but he was able to make it to the finish. So I'm almost wondering if that debris stays on there and he just keeps going for it, I think he could probably make it to the end.
Yeah, I don't think it fell off either. And it was like with 5 laps to go that this is all happening, so he could probably have pushed it and just maybe spitted a little water out by the end of the race versus blowing his motor up. So I think it was a safe move, but it was probably one he could have pushed the issue a little farther on.
Yeah, it's weird. He's got that wind cushion, so you'd think he'd almost go for it. If he didn't have the wind, do you think he'd still make the same decision? That's the I don't know factor. It's tough to say. I think he tried to back away from the move in his presser after the race by saying he didn't want to blow up the engine. okay, people blow up engines all the time. If you're going for the win, I think that kind of justifies it. But in the end, Dale Earnhardt Jr. picks up his second win of the year, and the first time since 2004. That's 10 years in between that he's won more than one race, and 2004 was a banner year for Earnhardt Jr., so he's looking to keep that up. Now, Jason, we're going to get into the television, which switched over from Fox to TNT. You did not have the pleasure of watching that coverage. You will this weekend when they go to the Michigan International Speedway, so let me get you caught up on what you might have missed there. So I'm going to throw out there the first thing I just have to wonder aloud, is Kyle Petty bribed into picking fights with drivers? Last year we saw him have a quote-unquote beef with Danica Patrick. This year he said some things about Brad Keselowski right about the time, and this happened last year, right about the time TNT takes over. It's almost like he needs to do something so everyone starts talking about the coverage and what's coming up for the 6 races that they have. And then another knock that I have on the broadcast was Wally Dallenbach, when he was talking about drivers making errors on pit road. The one that stood out to me was Tony Stewart speeding. He would snicker or laugh, or I don't know if it was a nervous tick or if he could just relate to the situation, but horribly unprofessional to kind of laugh at other people's misery when you're a broadcaster. You're supposed to have no allegiance to anyone or pick side. It just kind of infuriated me because he did it about 3 different times, and it's like, come on, man, you got to be better than that. And then with TNT's coverage, we had the fear that we kind of talked about last week about overwhelming number of commercials and KFC being drilled into our head. I will say the good news is this time around, there was no commercial that was driven into the ground like the KFCs of the past few years, although we still have Kentucky coming up, so we're not out of the woods yet. But it just, to me, seemed like commercials came up a lot. I don't know if it was more frequent than with Fox or even less frequent. It just seemed every minute they were going away to commercial, but that, I think, just is maybe a product of such a long race that you have to keep getting the sponsorships in.
And the good news is we have 5 races left with TNT, probably for a long time. So if we see some more things that we don't particularly like on the broadcast, we should remember they're almost done and they're almost out of NASCAR, probably for 10 or so more years.
That's a very good point, Jason. Next up, power rankings. I stayed the same across the board. Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon, Kevin Harvick. All 3 of them had decent afternoons at Pocono. They were up near the front. They didn't quite finish there. Stats tell me that they're still the 3 best drivers out there. Jason, we agree with Jimmy Johnson, but you were a little different when it came to your 2nd and 3rd place.
Yes, I went with Brad Keselowski for 2nd this weekend. He finished runner-up at Dover, I believe, too. And then another great performance this weekend, which really just shows he's got a little consistency going for him, and going to Michigan, a track where he desperately wants to win it, and he has yet to do so. I believe he's going to be very close again, so he's got a lot going for him right now, and really he can push it for the win, since we already said he already has 1 win this season, and pretty good cushion for the chase. And 3rd, I went with Dale Earnhardt Jr., which has been pretty good lately. 2 wins this season. He's definitely got momentum from this win, and going to Michigan, where that's basically been his best track in the last 5 years when he's really been struggling. Michigan always just seems to be a good track for him. So I think that Michigan, because Michigan's being such a good track for Keselowski and Earnhardt Jr., they're definitely going to probably stick around on our power rankings for next week too, if they can have a good performance on Sunday.
As you said, we're off to the Irish Hills of Michigan for the Quicken Loans 400. What are we expecting out of the race? Is it going to be boring or is it going to be exciting? I feel like it's going to be like Pocono all over again. We'll have some exciting moments, we'll have some boring moments. Because Michigan is just so big, the cars can really maneuver around and you're not going to see people running each other over. But at the same time, I could easily see this come down to a last lap pass or just 2 drivers duking it out for the finish.
Yeah, it's always a toss-up at Michigan whether we'll see some really exciting side-by-side racing for a while, or just, the spread out, really calm-mannered type of racing. Or, like you said, we'll probably see a mixture of both. And a fuel mileage is always a really big deal when it comes to Michigan, so that'll be really interesting to see if that will play any sort of role. And Michigan's always typically the spread out, boring race, and it's always such a big track that drafting, they get some drafts off the cars, but I've always wondered if NASCAR would ever put restrictor plates on these cars at some of the bigger tracks, like maybe Fontana or even Michigan, that could probably hold a restrictor plate race. The speeds are so high and the track is pretty wide.
That would be an interesting point. I can't see NASCAR doing it because the last time they hastily did it at New Hampshire, it led to a pretty boring race with Jeff Burton leading all 300 laps. I don't know. As you said that, I just got to thinking, I was looking over the notes from last year, and Joey Logano qualified over 200 miles per hour in Michigan, so it's maybe getting to that time where we got to start reining them in a little bit.
Yeah, and I think the speeds are really expected to be up again this weekend, so, if that develops into a trend over the next few years, maybe NASCAR just considers slowing the cars down because they may go just way too fast, and that could cause a really bad accident if NASCAR doesn't really rein them in and tie them down a little when it comes to the speeds of this track.
This weekend, Roush Fenway Racing needs to make a statement, and it's not going to be on the future of Carl Edwards or Greg Biffle, which Biffle, I'm hearing, is going to re-sign with them after it seemed like he was 2 feet out the door. Now all of a sudden he's back in, but I think that's more of a marriage of convenience than anything else. Michigan provides them with a track that they have a good history at and a good opportunity to get some wins. I think that they got to come out and perform. Edwards and Biffle have to be at the top. Stenhouse has to be up there as well. If they can't perform at Michigan, I think the ship might have sailed on Roush Fenway Racing for this season.
Definitely. If they can't perform well, Fords always do well here. Even Penske cars, they always can run well. And I can't say that they're not going to run well because I think they will. I think Biffle and Edwards, and maybe not as much Stenhouse, but definitely Biffle and Edwards will have somewhat of a good race, probably a top 10 performance. And if they do have another not so great race, and probably a lot of regrouping is going to need to happen in that team this summer if they have any hopes of rebounding as a whole organization.
It was interesting hearing Carl Edwards talk about the team and the major changes coming up next season or during this season, but he kind of sounded like someone who was already partway out of the door. But one exciting thing that we do have at the Michigan International Speedway this weekend is the return of Juan Pablo Montoya. He'll be driving a third entry for Team Penske, number 12, SKF Ford. What can we expect from Juan? He hasn't been lighting up the world in the IndyCar series, but at the same time, he comes to the track with a Team Penske team that's been on rails as of late with Logano and Keselowski.
I'm really interested to see how he does perform. I think being out of the car since the end of last year and the changes that have happened regarding the car for this season, I think he's going to be behind a little. He's probably not going to perform that well, and it'll be tough to say he's going to finish in the top 20. I bet he'll just hang around, probably go a few laps down, and just not have the greatest day. I think it's like Kurt Busch jumped into an Indy car and ran exceptionally well, but I think that's a little easier to do than jumping into a stat car for one race weekend with Kurt. He had about a month of preparation in that Indy car. Juan's going to have about 2 days before the race, and he has to go out and perform as best he can. So I think you won't expect fireworks out of them, but you can't. I don't think you can say he's going to finish 40, 20 laps down either. I think probably a somewhat moderate day is ahead for the number 12 car.
For Juan, I believe that he'll do pretty good out there. Actually, I'm going to be cheering him on a little bit because I think he kind of got a raw deal with Earnhardt Ganassi, Chip Ganassi Racing, whatever you want to call it. The team's turned around. I don't know if he was maybe the reason that was holding them back or just bad timing on his part. So I hope he goes out there and does pretty well. One driver that really wants to do pretty well is Dale Earnhardt Jr., who's talked about winning 2 in a row. I'm going to ask you, Jason, yes or no, is he going to do it?
No, I don't think he'll have that great of a shot because it's just he's never really been a driver who's going to come out with a bunch of straight performances that are really good. He'll he's a little spotty in how when he wins and when he performs well. So I think the Pocono was good, but even though Michigan's a pretty good track for him, I don't think he's going to be able to go back to back. But I think if the race maybe comes down to fuel mileage and Steve Letarte has this master plan he can throw at Dale, maybe then that's when we'll see him have another shot. But he probably will have a fast car, just not one that's capable of getting to the victory lane.
I agree. He'll be in the top 10, but he's not going to win. So, Jason, who is going to win?
I'm just going to go with Brad Keselowski. He's never won his home track before. He's been very good over the last few weeks, and I think he's just building up to a second win, and he's definitely going to get one before the summer. So I think his hot streak right now is going to lead him to victory lane for his second time in 2014.
It's tough to catch you in the pick'em standings if you're going to keep picking like I am. With that said, I'm going with Brad Keselowski as well. Stats say he's terrible at Michigan, but I look at the chip on his shoulder from Pocono, knowing that he should have won and he didn't win. It's his hometown track. He's going to try even harder to try to get the win. And his teammate Joey Logano won last year. That's got to give them momentum going into Michigan. So I got to go with the Team Penske boys and Brad Keselowski.
We know the Fords will be strong, so I think that's always driving our pick a little. But it'll definitely be an interesting race to see how the fast speeds really play out and who gets the victory lane at the end of the day.
That is correct. Jason, as of right now, you're not going out to Michigan to make it 3 in a row, are you?
Well, anything can change in the next day, but right now it doesn't look like it.
All right. Well, we'll be watching. You can maybe chime in this time around with the television when we come back next week. And I can't wait for the action, not only in Michigan, but the return of the Camping World Truck Series at the Gateway Motorsports Park.
Thanks for listening to the Fan3Cast. For more NASCAR coverage, check out StartingParkBlog.com and Turn4RacingNews.com. Follow along on Twitter at Fan3Cast, at StartingParkBlog, and at NASCARJason.